The views and opinions expressed by the hosts of this podcast are those of the individual and not of any affiliated companies. Occasional adult language is used.
Welcome to the ShamTalk podcast, the #1 Notre Dame athletics podcast in the world. Today, the guys discuss Coach Shrewsbury's recent pickups in the transfer portal, some interesting news stemming from a recent interview with Jack Swarbrick, and special guest Ryan Peters, who will help us continue our discussion on the future of university apparel. Now, recording from beautiful Cape Cod, here's your host, Jacob Irons.
We welcome you back for episode 3 of the ShamTalk podcast, along with JJ Post. I'm Jacob Irons. JJ, how are you doing today, good sir?
Not too bad. Just enjoying the week, enjoying the countdown Notre Dame football. Under 40 days now and getting closer every day.
Every day it starts to get closer, but let's take a look away from the gridiron here a little bit and let's talk a little Notre Dame men's basketball with the new addition of Mike Shrewsbury at the end of last year with Mike Bray stepping away. Get a big transfer and Tay Davis from Seton Hall. That, although he's a young guy that didn't have that much playing experience for the Pirates, he brings a new youthful energy to him.
Yeah, I mean, the counting stats don't pop off the page. You know, I don't have them in front of me. I think they look around like, 3 points a game, couple rebounds, nothing that you're going to look at and think like, this is a big time addition. But I do think it kind of speaks to the character of Shrewsbury's rebuild. The idea that, one, this is a guy who's already young, even for a freshman, he's young for a freshman. So he has multiple years of eligibility and presumably multiple years of development left to come. And that's the kind of transfer that, Notre Dame has been targeting. They've wanted players that have, 2-3 years of eligibility to learn the system, to learn, what Shrewsbury wants to do. This is not a team that is going to, enter the, as much as, we want them to win, but I don't think the expectation for this team heading into the season is going to be to make the tournament to even win, 15 conference games. The goal for this team is to get better. And that might come in the form of 10 games. That might come in the form of 20 games. Who knows? But it's definitely not going to be a team that on paper looks like it's going to win. It is going to be a team, however, like we said, that is going to be young, that is going to develop, and that is going to have, I think, tools is the best way to put it. You look at Shrewsbury's additions. A lot of these players are guys who have, they have tools in the sense that, they have not fully emerged on the court yet as stars, but they have the things that make you think they could be like high impact players. Tay Davis, kind of being a good example of this. He's got size, he's got a lengthiness about him that, makes you think he could probably be a bigger small forward than, most of the players in that range. He's 6'7" and he's got bounce. He can attack the rim, so I think these are the type of players that Shrewsbury's going to want to add, where he's spoken at length about not wanting to have any one system, but rather a system that fits his players. And I think kind of when you go that route of having a system that gets molded around who you have on your roster, that means you want to have a lot of versatile pieces. Davis, someone who can play both small forward and power forward, someone who has shown a willingness to kind of attack the rim, a willingness to, be bouncy, to be an impact player, on the court. That's the player Shrewsbury are looking for, someone who, might not be a finished product yet, but is going to be getting better every game, and someone who can look at in multiple ways and see where he fits best before he finds his final landing spot on Shrewsbury's rotation.
And you also have to give Shrewsbury a lot of credit. He said he wanted to commit Notre Dame basketball to being Indiana basketball again. Davis from Indianapolis, so should be a great pickup, having that local tie to Indiana. And like we talk about with Micah Shrewsbury as well, an Indiana guy, first coaching career was at IU South Bend. He grew up and went through the ranks here in Indiana. So a large commitment by him to get Davis, an Indianapolis kid, to come to Notre Dame and relive a dream along those lines. But to go off of a little bit more on Shrewsbury and his hiring process, in a recent interview, Athletic Director Jack Swarbrick mentioned he went for 3 swing for the fences candidates before Shrewsbury, who all said no. JJ, I don't even want to know who you think we went out to, but let's hear who you think, because I think you might have some guys that I might be thinking of that might be out there that may have already been in the retirement chair.
Yeah, there's a couple of interesting, ways to take this one. For someone who is not retired, I think Chris Holtman is probably my best guess for one of those 3 spots, given, it was already part of the rumor mill that he was considering, or perhaps Notre Dame wanted him to consider a move to Notre Dame. And that was something that popped up late on in the season. I wouldn't say that came up randomly, although it's always possible. I find it hard to believe that a name like Holtman, who probably wouldn't have otherwise been connected to the Notre Dame job, would not have been connected to the job if there wasn't maybe some degree of attempt to persuade him to come join. So that's name number one. Name number two, I'd say Jay Wright, mainly because, he's in retirement. Listen, the reason we said shoot for the moon is I think everyone knows Jay Wright is not going to be coaching another college basketball team unless it's Villanova. That is a Villanova man through and through. I think he'd rather, coach out overseas than take over any college but his beloved Wildcats. But, he is a coach that has had unquestioned success at a Notre Dame-esque, Notre Dame adjacent, however you want to put it, institution, where you have unique challenges in recruiting, unique challenges in how you have to build your program. And I think, if you're Notre Dame, you would have, I think Jack Swarbrick would have walked to Philadelphia himself, if that's what it would have taken to pay Jay Wright's flat out. But obviously that didn't work out. My third candidate, I'm less sure about because I don't think there's a clear, hey, this is a guy that might work at Notre Dame. Steve Peichel, maybe up there, from Rutgers, a guy who has kind of spoken in the past about his fandom as a kid, a Notre Dame fan. Maybe that could have been a way they inquired. Monty Williams, obviously from the Suns. It seems a little less far-fetched now that he had been, fired by the Suns, but maybe Swarbrick knew something we all didn't in the middle of the season and thought, hey, maybe we can offer him this safety valve and get him out. But I think he's fine now with the Detroit Pistons. And I think those are the two guys I'm kind of drawn between for that third shoot for the moon spot. I'm sure there's a couple other names you can, mention. Chris Quinn from the Miami Heat is also up there as someone that is a Notre Dame guy that's been in the NBA assistant ranks for a long time, highly rated. Maybe he was someone they reached out to, but I think it would almost certainly have been Holtman. I suspect Jay Wright got a call. And then I think that third spot could be between any of Monty Williams, Chris Quinn, maybe John Calipari in there since he's been under fire at Kentucky. Guys that Notre Dame obviously didn't have much of a shot at, but if you're a Swarbrick and you're making your last hire, you couldn't not give them a call.
Jay Wright was mine. I thought Jay Wright had to have been at least given a phone call, especially with, like you said, his excellence at a school that has very much Notre Dame-esque in a realm of that long lines. But like you said, he's a Wildcat through and through. We'll take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. But on the other side, you're talking to Ryan Peters about the new merchandise deal that is coming and his hot take where Notre Dame should go. Stay with us.
You're listening to the ShamTalk podcast, the #1 Notre Dame athletics podcast in the world. We appreciate your support, and we're constantly looking for ways to improve the listener experience. In order to do that, we need your help. We have a pretty cool relationship with Amazon.com, and we'd like to invite you to join us. Amazon recently sent us a special link. When you use this link to buy something from Amazon, we receive a small percentage of the order. Best of all, it costs nothing extra for you. The link is available on the screen and in the description below. Once again, before you head to Amazon, start with our link. It doesn't cost you anything extra, and it helps us provide you with the best possible listener experience. Thanks for your support, and let's send it back to the guys.
We thank you for the kind words from our partners in Amazon, but now bringing on to talk a little bit more of Irish apparel, bring on the man himself, Ryan Peters, who had a fabulous article in The Observer detailing the tradition about Champion and Notre Dame's legacy. Ryan, thanks for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me. Long time, first time.
This is a guy that knows the metro area very well, JJ. So let's first start. We talked about it in our first episode about the ever revolving door that is this merchandise deal, but you had a take that went beyond anything we talked about, which was Champion. Can you really explain why you believe Champion is the right company to go with right now?
Yeah, so this goes beyond just straight how it looks on the field. And I lay this out in my column. But basically, first off, I think black cleats, actually gold pants. I think that's the best look. I think Notre Dame should go back to just across the board black cleats. But when you think about Notre Dame and the conversation surrounding Notre Dame football right now, you hear so much, there's almost like this panic because in reality, Notre Dame's in the top 1%, if not less, of the sport right now, but we just can't get over that mountaintop. And so people start to panic. And when you listen to the conversation often surrounding the apparel deal, and a lot of this is just because it's summer and we have nothing to talk about, you hear about like, oh, like if Notre Dame wants to get 5-star recruits, we have to do this. Oh, if Notre Dame wants to like, win the big game, if Notre Dame wants to recruit at a high level and become cool, we have to do this. And I think Notre Dame's just in this constant mode of catch up. And I don't think trying to imitate, the Georgias, Alabamas, maybe even Oregon or like Miami, kind of those NIL powers looks cool. I don't think that's a good spot for Notre Dame to be in. So I think by going to Champion, and really any apparel brand can do this, like mesh jerseys, but kind of Notre Dame, but by going to Champion and simplifying things, going back to its roots, I think Notre Dame can begin to differentiate itself. Because when you think about it, like Alabama doesn't wear alternate uniforms. So it's just Nick Saban has come out and said, like, the brand is the brand. And Notre Dame has the most powerful brand in sports. And I think fussing over these little things like, what brand is going to be on the collarbone, stuff like that. I think it's just, it kind of removes Notre Dame from what makes it cool, which is gold helmets, a traditionally good football team that's still good, and a school that's a little bit different. And I think by kind of actually embracing those roots and being unapologetically Notre Dame, I think that moving forward is probably the best way to be appealing across the board to recruits.
Very interesting take on that, because many people, and I think JJ touched upon this a little bit last time, is Nike has that cool factor to it. It has that cool factor. So why do you believe that for the recruits at this given moment, that Champion would do the same as Nike for that cool factor, which, understanding that there is a little bit of a resurgence of Champion, but that's a very different thing than just to have a Champion t-shirt and Champion sweatpants on the side instead of being your sole provider?
Yeah, so I don't think Champion will give us that cool provider in the sense of, you look at the jersey, you're like, oh, wow, that's really cool. What I think it does is, so in my opinion, the Notre Dame brand is the brand that matters. And I think the Notre Dame brand is cool. It's a brand that has 11 national championships. It's a brand that has touchdown Jesus and a golden dome. It's historic, and I think people respect that. And no, Champion's not going to give us that cool factor, but I also don't think having Nike jerseys is all of a sudden going to like lead to this huge momentum swing of Notre Dame being cool. I think Marcus Freeman can certainly help with that. But I think people just kind of delude themselves into thinking that this stuff matters a whole lot, when in reality, like, I don't think our apparel provider or even necessarily NIL is really going to help that much when it comes to beating the Alabamas, Georgias, Ohio States, and recruiting and even on the field. I think ultimately you kind of have to accept where Notre Dame is to an extent. But you just can't get into this arms race into thinking that the stuff matters, because ultimately what matters is winning big time games and producing high-end NFL talent. Because really the only recruits Notre Dame is missing out on are these 5-stars, like the Justin Scott, the 5-star defensive tackle at Chicago, goes to Ohio State. And yeah, it's a bit of a chicken or the egg situation in terms of producing high-end NFL talent, because often those are 5-star recruits. But I don't think switching to Nike is all of a sudden going to change that. I think ultimately you just have to unapologetically be yourself and kind of go back to that edge that Notre Dame, I feel like, used to have when they were at their peak. And I just think this like constant tweaking things until we think we're quote unquote cool, I don't think that actually looks cool. I think kind of differentiating yourself a little bit and embracing who you are is the best way to be cool and to stand out.
I think you had a line there. I really like the idea that Notre Dame is the brand and it's not the actual provider that, sets it apart. I think that kind of speaks to the fact that a lot of the criticism of Under Armour is not that sure, Under Armour is less cool than Nike. I think that's an objective statement. But I think a lot of the reason why people want to move on from Under Armour is the actual merch they produce for Notre Dame is not as good as you'd expect for what is the sole big brand of Under Armour's branch of branch of apparel deals, I should say. So I think the question I want to get into is, there was one writer for The Athletic that pitched an idea that perhaps Notre Dame could pair with a non-traditional apparel provider. I believe the example they used was Lululemon, and kind of pair that with an Under Armour or a Nike who's more traditional in the cleats, helmet game. Do you think something like that could work with Champion, where maybe they design the jerseys, something that they have proven they could do for Notre Dame at a high level, and then pair that with a more traditional, perhaps footwear sponsor, be it Under Armour, be it Nike, somewhere that, because Champion, obviously, for all the merits, is not exactly a brand that's really cornering the line on, cleats, for example. Do you think some sort of hybrid deal could, perhaps be expanded? Because we know Notre Dame does at the moment have some sort of deal where Champion can produce, like, I believe, leisure apparel for the school, if not all of it. Do you think they could do something like that with the actual jerseys themselves?
So absolutely. So first off, I think the Lululemon idea, I remember reading that. I think it's genius. But actually, at the end of Notre Dame's initial deal with Champion, they're partners for about 50 years. So it was in the late 90s. Champion, I think, stopped producing footwear. And so Notre Dame had Champion jerseys and I think Adidas shoes. So one, it's not only possible, it's been done before. But I think this is what I'm getting at with Notre Dame. We need to innovate, because if we hop on with Nike, like, Nike's obviously Oregon's their kind of guinea pig where they innovate. Phil Knight, Oregon, like, Notre Dame is not going to be the golden child, no pun intended, of Nike. But with something like Champion, and with Under Armour, we are this to an extent. We'll be able to innovate like that. And so I think this is the line of thinking that Notre Dame should have, instead of thinking like, oh, Nike or Jordan will be so cool. I mean, yeah, they make good apparel, but in terms of actually enhancing the brand and channeling what makes Notre Dame cool, I think we need to innovate. And so having a deal with Champion, where it even gives you some flexibility to have it be non-exclusive, because Champion doesn't make footwear. So we would have to do this for, basketball cleat or basketball high shoes, cleats, for sports across the board. I think this is the mindset we need to have. And so, JJ, I completely agree with your point. And then to answer your question, yes, I think Notre Dame not only can do this, but should do this regardless of their apparel provider.
That will do it for this episode of the ShamTalk podcast. Alongside my co-host, JJ Post, I'm Jacob Iron, saying so long. JJ, any hot takes with the Women's World Cup starting?
Nothing. If you want a good bet, take Sophia Smith to win the Golden Boot. I believe it's going for plus 700 on FanDuel right now. I can't guarantee you success, but you're not going to find a better bet for plus 700 than that. So that's my only take for the day. Monetary advice of JJ. Go gamble.
Go gamble from JJ Post. I'm Jacob Iron saying so long, ShamTalk podcast. We'll see you next week.
If you enjoyed this episode and you'd like to help support the podcast, please subscribe and leave a rating and review. To stay up to date with ShamTalk and get all our behind-the-scenes content, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Notre Dame Television. That's all for now. Thanks for listening, and go Irish!